Hello everybody, and hello to the wonderful Sara Sartagne. Sarah, have I pronounced your surname correctly?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
That's brilliant. It's so lovely to have you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Nice to be here.
Just a little bit about Sara. She's a newbie indie author. She has a novella out at present called Bouquet of White Roses. And this novella is the prequel to a novel, The Garden Plot, which is available for pre-order on Amazon right now. So go and get it. Currently, Sara lives near York in a little village called, get this, Pocklington, with her partner. Such a lovely name. And it's one of the last places in England to execute a witch. I love that. That is so amazing.
I have to say that wasn't part of our strategy for choosing the house, but it did seem to justify it when we found out, if you like.
Well, it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful, and I can imagine that as an author, that must tick over in your mind and bring up all sorts of things. So, are there witchy books in the future?
Yeah, I've got the second book I wrote is a standalone, actually. So I'm in the middle of a trilogy, but the second book that I've written, called The Visitor, has got someone who is accused of being a witch in it. So, but it's two stories. One's contemporary and the other one is set in the 1600s. So I'm hoping to release that sometime in the summer. But currently, the if you like, the main focus is trying to get the trilogy finished.
Well, you're going about it the right way. Yes, we're supposed to be finishing series first, aren't we? And then move on to something else. Don't do what I did, jump genres. Because it was a nice, big, new, shiny thing. So I want to talk to you today. Before I start talking about what we're going to talk about, I want to ask you just this. You say you're a newbie indie author. Does that mean you were traditionally published before, or is this a completely new thing for you to do?
No, it's a completely new thing for me to do. I got talking to actually one of my professional clients who said, "Oh, you need to talk to Josie. She writes." And when I met Josie, who is J.A. Clements, and she writes fairy tales, she just basically said, "Well, you don't want to be bothered being traditionally published," she said. You need to come and do it yourself. And I went, how do I do that? And Josie's been marvellous. As indeed so many other people, and kind of taking me along my author journey. It's been a real privilege working with some of these people who are just so generous with their time. So, I'm part of the SPF community. I'm on the Genius site. I'm also on the community. And people are just so lovely. They are so generous with their time and with information. It's a real joy. I wish I'd done it years ago.
Well, I can relate because, like you, I'm also on the SPF. And for those listeners who don't know what that is, it's the self-publishing formula run through Mark Dawson's wonderful multi-gazillion dollar empire now. Yeah, and like you, I'm also on the Genius side as well. So those are obviously private groups, only accessible through SPF, isn't it?
The community isn't.
No, the community isn't, but yes, that's a good idea to go on the community one if you want to find out more, because it is, as you say, an incredible community. The indie author community has been fantastic to me as well. So I absolutely hear what you're saying and I agree. So let's get on with our chat today. I want to talk to you about love, your thoughts and feelings and beliefs around love, and why, as a romance author, do you write about love? What is the value of love for you in the world? What is it that you want to say through your books about love?
I think that love is truly what makes the world go round. So it's in many forms. It made me rather cross to think of romance as something that people could look down their nose at. I mean, you've only got to look at Anna Karenina, which has got a love story right at the heart of it. And that's considered to be one of the greatest works of literature. So I'm not quite sure where people are coming from when they say that romance is not worth reading. You know, Jane Austen. There are love stories at the centre of Jane Austen's novels. Wuthering Heights.
Yeah.
So all of those are accepted works of literature.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I dare say that people wouldn't turn up their nose at Shakespeare's sonnets, many of which are also based around love. I did an English literature degree,
Mm-hmm.
so I've always been around books, but I have always also loved to read it. So Georgette Heyer is just one of my go-to authors.
Mm-hmm.
Jane Austen is another one.
Right.
But also, you know, some of the more, don't know about more recent authors, but Maury MacLean and people like Nora Roberts. And the thing with the romance genre is that it's so enormous.
Right.
I mean, in terms of what you could write about if you chose to. So there's something like, according to K-Lytics, Alex Newton says that there are something like 90 romance genres on Kindle.
I'm not surprised.
So you can write about contemporary literature, you can talk about queer and gay characters, you can have crime bits in it, there's fantasy, paranormal. I mean, they haven't finished inventing either.
No.
The plethora of romantic genres that you could choose to look at if you wanted to.
Absolutely. I mean, there's the new ones, aren't there? The ones, the alien romances and the reverse harem ones.
All of that stuff. So, for one thing, for me, it's endlessly varied. So, if I wanted to get into a discussion, or if I wanted to read about an emotional connection between two people, or two beings, let's put it that way, rather than two people.
Right.
Romance is where I'd go to.
Uh-huh.
And there's so much that you can look at. So that's certainly why I write it, because actually the avenues that I could explore are just so wide and varied. I mean, currently I am solidly in contemporary, but who knows where I might go in the future.
Right.
And it's those options, I think, that you could actually perhaps take your readers down a different path if they wanted to follow you. That's really exciting.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And I love some of those authors that you've mentioned as well. I'm at the moment going through a phase of reading every Nora Roberts book I can find. It is astonishing and illuminating to see how she progressed and how she progresses in the genre she's writing within romance. Because I've just finished reading a trilogy that's a post-apocalyptic type thing, but it's romance and it's fantasy. And I was like, what? I mean, it's obviously her writing. You can tell it's her writing because it's her style and her voice, but it's so not what I expected from her, you know?
But that's what I mean about, you know, if I decided that I wanted to try and explore a new avenue with my readers, I'm kind of hoping that, you know, if they like my writing well enough, they'll come with me and we can explore it together. That would be such fun.
Yes.
That would be great.
I know exactly what you mean. So you write it, as you say, because if you are looking for connection between beings or people, that's where you go, to romance. So what are your thoughts and your beliefs around love in that way then? Is it more than connection?
Well, I suppose in the same way that there are many, you know, different genres, there are also very many different types of connection. I am of the view that, especially going through these difficult times that we are, where in actual fact, the relationships that we can have, by and large, are over the internet rather than face-to-face. And I think that may force us to do some really interesting thinking about our relationships with people. So, you know, what is it that makes someone lovable when you can't touch them?
Right.
Is it going to be their voice that you fall in love with? Is it going to be what they say? Or is it the fact that actually they've always got a kind word to say for other people that you love? Is it that kind of combination? None of which, incidentally, has got anything to do with the way you look, necessarily.
Right.
So who knows what will happen by the time we get through the pandemic. But I'm sort of hoping that there might be a shift in what people really value about their relationships, you know, for something good to come out of it in the way that people relate to one another, that it's not just based on what people look like, but is actually based on a human connection that's pretty indefinable and certainly doesn't come in a package.
Yes.
So Does that answer your question?
It does, and I absolutely agree with you. And I have a very strong feeling that that is exactly what's going to happen. And you are right. I think as a result of this and the distancing, the social distancing that we are enforced to participate in, it has to have an impact on how we form relationships in the future. One of my friends jokingly said, oh, well, there goes dating agencies because nobody can date. But I think that that's not quite true. I think you are right in that we will reevaluate what is important to us as human beings. What are the qualities that we look for in other people rather than the external? And it just feels to me that that is what it looks like for everything. It looks like everything that was external will now be reevaluated. And this is forcing us all to have a look at what is really important. Not only in terms of ourselves, but what is it that's important in terms of our relationships with others. Because like you said, we can't touch people. So that removes a huge thing because we know that touch is extremely important in forming bonds with people. We know that. We know there's pheromones involved in being near people. And as we aren't able to be near people and most of our relationships probably will now be online, there will be different things. And I love that you said maybe it's the voice, because of course I've studied voice all my life. It's my passion, it's my specialism. And so I would love that to be one of the reasons. And I think it probably might be, because even in real life, when you are next to somebody, the voice is really important too, isn't it?
I mean, before we had electronic means of communication, before we had the telephone, people used to court through letters. And what I would like to see is a romance that comes out of the pandemic, which concentrates on how people have communicated with one another, rather than necessarily just what they look like. Because you can't tell about somebody's animal magnetism on paper, on a Skype call.
True.
or indeed on paper. Exactly. Yeah. So I think that our senses might sharpen up a bit, because at the moment it's all eyes, isn't it?
It's external.
That would be interesting. That would be a really interesting direction for literature to go down. I think for romance novels to go down.
Yes.
But I don't think, even though they're going to, I imagine that people's reactions to one another are going to change. I actually don't feel that the purpose of romance novels will change. Because I think one of the reasons why, there's such a huge readership of them. So I don't know. I think the last time I looked, the romance industry was worth more than $1 billion.
Yes, I was just going to say it's billions, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think that one of the reasons that they are even more popular potentially in the future than they are now is because people crave certainty.
Right.
And to be a romance novel within the genre, if you like, to be within the romance genre, you generally have to have a fairly certain happy ending.
Yes.
And if you don't, there better be another book
to
take the story on a bit closer to the happy ending. And I think in the chaos that is around us, that some sense of predictability can be really very helpful for people. And I know that the romance genre gets criticised a lot for this, but in actual fact, given the popularity of the genre, I think that's what people actually want. They want some certainty.
Yes, you're right. I hadn't ever thought of it in that way, but I think you're right. I think that is part of it, that people want certainty. They want the happy ending. They want to know that everything's going to be okay.
I mean, it doesn't actually, in some respects, I don't think it limits the genre in any way. Because, you might start off with a bunch of characters and the reader might more or less know what's going to happen towards the end.
Right.
But actually, how you get there,
right,
that's where your skill as a writer comes.
Exactly.
how people get to their happy ending.
Yes.
You know, all the stuff you can throw in their way.
Yes.
That's just an obstacle to be gotten over. And obviously, you know, the more ingenious your getting around the obstacles is, the better a read it's going to be.
And also, I think part of those obstacles are the characters themselves, their inner obstacles often.
Most definitely. You know, their self-doubt, their memories they can't get rid of, their view of themselves as something completely different to what they are. Right. And if you look at Pride and Prejudice, there are two people there whose vision of themselves is completely different to what it actually needs to be in the circumstances.
Yeah.
So I think writing romance is a way of providing certainty in a new way for people. If you do it really well, you don't tell the same story over and over. You might get the same end, but it's a different story with a different set of obstacles.
Yeah.
And I love that.
I do too, you know, and this is the thing. I mean, this is probably a strange question, but I think a valid one. How do you think romance has changed over the years to become something that we now can relate to in a way that makes more sense to us? Because many of us, let's face it, still love reading those old romances. We love the romance of the romance novels of yesteryear, don't we? So it's something we yearn for, that older, yady romance side of it. And yet I read a lot of modern contemporary romance where women are stronger, you know, they do their own thing, they go their own way, they don't need the man to rescue them. And I think that's very good, that's valid, that's absolutely where we are. But I wonder why we therefore still yearn for the romance of the yesteryear's romances, if that makes sense to you.
I mean, I suppose one of the ways in which the genre has changed and why people read romance avidly as they do is that the people who write about it now are reflecting their own lives quite often. So in contemporary literature, so again, to take my example of Jane Austen or even Emily Bronte, neither of those two authors would have put their heroine in a bar, quaffing champagne after a hard day at work. Yeah, but they did put them into houses where they wrote letters and they did needlework. Right. They did things in the community,
which was the order of their day.
Exactly. So the golden thread of it is the relationship.
Right.
The environment is just what has changed.
The reason I'm asking this is because it's something that fascinates me particularly. You are absolutely right that the external of the romance books have changed, but the internal, the relationships between the people have not changed. Yet, as people, we have changed, if you see what I mean. Women of those days could be feisty, but I don't think that they would be quite as feisty as we are now.
Or what do you think? Right there. Yeah, well, yes, obviously. But so as a result, the first Mary Barlow book that I ever read, I kind of opened it thinking it was going to be another Georgette Heyer. And the next thing I knew, there was a couple having sex. And it's like, that would never happen in Georgette Heyer. But that's not necessarily, that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. Because I think we always look back on literature that's written several hundred years before our time as something where, in actual fact, the women didn't have desire.
Right.
Didn't have needs or wants because they weren't reflected in the book. I mean, the people to write about sex actually were the guys. So Tom Richardson wrote Clarissa, but even her desires were not the desires, that actually it was just people doing stuff to her that was the format of the book. My view about the literature that we read of the past, the love stories that we read of the past, most of the time the women don't have the vocabulary to express their desires, and certainly not in the way that we do now.
Yes.
So it was interesting, actually. I saw, when I was in the States on holiday one year, I literally ran into an exhibition about Harlequin and Mills and Boon covers.
Oh, right. Oh, gosh, yes.
Through the ages.
That must have been fascinating.
Well, certainly Mills and Boon covers as a kind of social commentary is just one of the most fascinating things ever.
Yes.
So you go from demure-looking girls in the 50s and 60s into slightly more risque women in the 70s, 80s, 90s and now.
Right.
And, wearing often fewer and fewer clothes. There was something about a key date when a girl was shown in a bikini on a Mills and Boon cover that was, kind of really very shocking.
Yeah.
Because up until that time, they'd been completely dressed.
Clothed. Yes.
And now you get them in various stages of undress or with backless frocks or whatever it is. And it's all really interesting as a commentary on A, the environment around the romance, but B, also about how women see themselves.
Yes.
Because women have to see themselves in the book
in
order for them to be kind of emotionally connected to the writing.
Right.
So if it's completely out of their understanding, if the emotions aren't the emotions that they have felt or they recognise, they are not really going to connect with you as a writer.
True.
But it's the emotion that's been the consistent thread all the way through, I think. So as you say, the environment may change, but the key part of the romance novel is the relationship and how women relate to the emotion within the book.
It's true, because I read something quite some time ago about Mills and Boons and how it started, and that it was books written for women, by women, about women. And I think that is probably still true, that it is still about women, but I don't think it's necessarily written by women anymore. I know a lot of male authors who write romance and do it very well. And straight romance, not necessarily gay romance, which is interesting to me too. You mentioned something that I want to come back to. You mentioned sex. You're the first romance author I'm talking to who's talking about sex. None of the others mentioned it, and it is something that is in the books. It is something that is part of our lives. So how important do you think it is to be in the romance books? Because as you said, there's so many varieties of romance novels. And so you do get the sweet romances, don't you? That's got absolutely no sex in it at all, and the Christian romances and stuff like that. So how important is it that sex is in a romance book?
Well, that's really interesting as a question, because when I first started writing my first book, I thought it was very important. I thought it was very important that it was realistic.
Right.
And that I recognised the pattern of behaviour, or I recognised the situation in which people would go to bed together.
Right.
Or have sex together. I think as I've continued to write, I've found it less important, which is a bit of a surprise to me. So in the garden plot, there's a scene of cuddling, I suppose. Intense cuddling, can we call it that?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Where they both decide that really it's not the right time. And then towards the end of the book, there is another scene where it is indeed the right time.
Right.
And that's when it happens. So that's the garden plot. But in the prequel to the garden plot, which is set 30 years earlier, there is no sex at all.
Okay, that's interesting, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet that was in the 80s. It didn't seem to me to be right for the book that I put it in.
Well, that makes complete sense. If it doesn't make sense, it shouldn't be there, right?
Well, yes, but there are, I think, quite a lot of books where, in fact, the writing is just leading up to the opportunity for everybody to get their kit off.
Right.
And that just that's not attractive to me. So I'm quite interested in the writing, and I'm quite interested in how people relate to one another physically, and what they like and they don't like.
Right.
As characters.
Right, and their honesty about it.
And their honesty about it.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. But actually, I'm way more interested in the development of the relationship, but not to the extent where I am prepared to go back to the 1950s where, the camera's backing out of the room and there's still one foot on the floor kind of thing. I don't think that's real. I prefer to have it as real as possible.
I agree with you. I'm the same. I am very interested in the sex part in romance novels, and I do write those in my books. But like you, I only put them in when it's necessary. The sex scenes are part of the development of the characters and is part of the development of the story. I think it comes from my years of working in theatre, because I also worked as a director for many years, and I still do from time to time. And you never put something in a show that isn't meant to be there and that doesn't further the story. My question to you is this. When we have characters who are coming to terms with their baggage, shall we say, their internal baggage or external baggage, often sex is the catalyst for healing. Would you agree with that?
I think it can be. So in my standalone novel, in the contemporary story, there is a scene where, in actual fact, sex is used as something to try and heal, but it doesn't. I think you've got to be really sure that, given everything that's happened in terms of how you've got to this point, actually writing sex as a healing thing, I think you've got to be absolutely on the money with both your characters and the situation, because otherwise I think it works out as indeed I've used it in The Visitor, as something which just makes everybody feel bad afterwards.
Because, of course, it can have those things, and this is why I'm so interested in it, because it has many different uses. People think that sex is people coming together and being loving with each other. But it's about power, it's about hurting the other person, it's about revenge, there's so much, and it is because it's such an emotional, explosive thing, usually. That's why it fascinates me, and that is why I write it. For me, it's about what it does to the couple. What is it that gets furthered as a result of it? And I think it can be such a dangerous element.
Yeah, and, handle with care, really. I mean, I don't know about anybody else's first sexual experience, but mine was a complete disaster.
I think most of us.
Well, exactly. But, there are lots of almost expectation setting in romance novels.
Right.
That actually your first time is going to be as glorious.
Yes.
As it was for the woman on this page, but in actual fact, the reality is something very, very different.
Often, yes.
So sex is really interesting as a topic, and I hadn't thought of it in quite those terms until I started talking to you. But when I think about sex in my books, first and foremost, it's used like salt, very sparingly. Yeah, very sparingly, and entirely in line with the characters. And their situation at that time. So, am I still learning? Good grief. So, when I wrote The Visitor, I mean, I must have spent 6 months shoring up the plot holes in it. So as a result, I'm still learning all the time when I write, and I don't think you can ever stop. But
no.
My views about using sex in books, I think, are actually quite instinctual, because I think sex is instinctual.
Oh, definitely.
So if you get to a stage in the novel and you think, would they go to bed now? And the answer is no, they'd probably cuddle and go to sleep. Actually, that's the right answer.
Yes.
Almost regardless of the traditions of the genre.
Right, or the opportunity that has presented itself.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So in the garden plot, for example, my heroine is a garden designer, and she is designing and building a garden for this quite reclusive businessman with a young daughter. And in the book, there's a mix-up with plants and stone and God knows what else. And all of my heroine's workmates disappeared to sort it out. She is left on her own, working in the garden. And the businessman, who has started to notice her, suddenly realises that she is on her own, and actually there's a storm coming in.
Okay.
And one of the lines that I use when she gets drenched and she's obviously sodden and he invites her in for a cup of coffee and stuff, is that he thinks this was like the worst scene from a porn movie. Yeah. And I thought, yeah, it is like the worst scene of a porn movie. So let's not go there. Let's just do something different. And I think if you're able to have those kind of conversations while you're writing with yourself,
of course, as you do,
yeah, exactly. Then I think that your instinct should be quite right. I mean, you're right in terms of it being a power thing. I mean, some of the early romance books that I devoured at school as a teenager, I mean, some of them were, little less than rape.
I know, you're right.
And that's actually, when you look back on it, that's incredibly disturbing. So what you said about books for women, written by women, about women. Yes, goodness me. Let's give the women some power in this. And actually, that requires them occasionally to say, no, I don't want to do that.
Exactly. And it comes back to that honesty. Because I think for many, many years, there's that old joke about if there's a room full of people and, someone on the stage and they go, let's see a show of hands, who's ever faked an orgasm? All the hands go up, And you think, well, why would you do that? Men don't. Why do we? So for me, it's about honesty. It's when you said you write romance to be real, to be as real as possible so that your readers can relate to the character, relate and understand that what they're going through, the reader also can go through. Because that's when I think the book makes sense for your readers. And that is one of the reasons why, to me, I want my heroines also to be as honest about themselves as possible. Because I think all art, and let's face it, romance novels are also art. I feel all art must teach us something. It must impact us in some way. It must make us think. So if someone has read one of my books and they go, oh, she's really honest that this isn't working for her or this is working for her, then maybe I should do that too. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe it makes for a better relationship, not just with myself, but with my partner. It makes for better intimacy. So that is my take on it, really. But I find this conversation with you so interesting because, like I said, you're the first romance author I've interviewed talking about sex. None of the other people did, although I'm sure they write about it.
So it's perfectly possible, of course, to have love and romance without sex.
Of course, it is.
But it's just another element, I think.
I think it's a really important element, though. I really do.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you that doesn't mean to say that it has to be there. So I've absolutely got no problem with anybody who writes. I mean, all of the older love stories, all of the kind of classic literature that we've talked about, all managed to have perfectly fabulous love stories without sex, with the exception of Anna Karenina.
Right.
Really,
yes.
I suppose. But all of Georgette Heyer's back catalogue has no sex in it either.
In it, yeah.
And yet, they were absolutely everything I ever wanted when I was reading them.
Right.
But that's, I think, because the characters are sufficiently well drawn that you don't actually miss it.
True.
So
good
there
writing.
is something about character development to the point where, in actual fact, just because they don't get into bed together, it's still a fulfilling read. It's still a realistic read because you understand them enough to know that actually that was what they were like. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But having said that, I think that you can include sex in a way that simply burnishes the characters and polishes them and gives them some human outlet, actually.
Yeah, because, we were talking earlier about touch being important, touch bonding. And I think that is partly one of the elements of sex that makes it important in a relationship. It's that bonding that deepens the relationship. And so from that point of view, that's why I feel it's important. And I feel it can be healing. It can be a spiritual experience. But I do agree with you that you don't necessarily have to write about it. And I think you and I agree that we write it when it's needed.
You know, you were talking earlier on to me about people turning their nose up at the idea of romance.
Yes, I come across it in social media quite a lot, where people go, oh, you know, of course I don't read romance. And I'm thinking, really, why?
You don't read about the key relationship in people's lives.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, isn't that
It's
strange?
weird.
I mean, there are so many different types of romance that you could look at, and I think that it's almost ignorant to dismiss an entire genre.
Yes, I agree. And that is one of the reasons I'm talking to so many romance authors in this series that I'm making, because that is the thing that made me go, what? You don't read an entire genre? I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, but also I think romance authors themselves, you know, have got their responsibility in this. There are people who almost apologise by being, you know, by saying they're a romance author, and good grief, I am one of them. Until I got to, so I was one of them until I got to grips with the SPF course. So the self-publishing formula has turned me from someone who, you know, would want to say, oh yeah, well it's just a romance, into someone who says, no, god damn it, this is a damn good book about the relationship between two people.
Yes, absolutely.
Not everybody feels like that. And, you know, I've seen perfectly confident romance writers who are just owning their genre and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But somewhere along the line, I think there's a transition. I don't think it comes automatically. And I think romance authors have got their responsibility to stand up for the genre.
Absolutely.
To say, you know, don't give me that stuff. You know, and to know their stuff enough to be able to point out the flaws in the arguments that are coming towards them. I was thinking that at its heart, most great art has got a relationship at the heart of it. So opera singer. So, you know,
all operas.
What opera didn't have sex or death in it?
Of course.
I mean, you know, it's basically not an opera if that doesn't happen.
In all of them. Yeah.
In all of them. So you look at the flirtation in Così fan tutte, you look at the power of Turandot, you look at the jealousy that's ignited in Carmen.
Yes.
I mean all of that.
Yes.
All of that at its heart has a key relationship.
And that's what makes the drama.
Exactly. You wouldn't have art unless you had that relationship at the heart of it.
Yes,
and
I agree.
It's not even about two separate different people. It's actually about the person who is looking or experiencing the art and the creator.
Well, this is it. I mean, when I teach voice, one of the things that I teach people also is about the fact that when you create art, it is only half the thing. The piece of art only becomes whole when it is experienced by the other person. So whether it is a reader or a listener or somebody who's going to see a show or whoever it is, the participant is the one that completes the art that you offer the world.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel that that's really important. And I think that that is as much part of the romance genre as any other art form. And I really do believe that romance is part of art. It is an art form.
But in the same way that, you know, I can pick up a historical novel now and have sex that I would never have dreamt of seeing in a Georgia Aya, is just part of my education. It's not that the people actually feel any differently. They still have the same urges. They still have the same needs, the same desires. It's just that now they are expressed because you have an audience who actually wants to read about that side of their characters.
Yes. And I think it goes with what you said earlier, that when people read a book, whether it's a romance book or whatever, but I think specifically with romance, they want to identify with the character, with the female character. And because we live in a world where we are freer than we've ever been before, and where we are able to express our desires in a way that we perhaps never were able to do before, I think it is almost another element that people can relate to when they read something that has very good sex scene in it, where they read it and they go, yeah, I can relate to this because this is what I feel like too. And so,
absolutely.
So that's why, for me, it's part of the art of it.
Yeah. The other thing is that I think it's like something like almost 2/3 of people who write romance are indie authors.
Right. Yes, I heard this.
Without the constraints of an agent or a publisher, you can actually write what the hell you like.
Yes.
And that, I think, can be freeing in a way that perhaps we haven't talked about today, or even that actually I've only just recognised. So, if I decided that I wanted to do a certain thing in a book, there wouldn't be anybody tapping me on the shoulder saying, excuse me, Sarah, you can't do that.
Yes. Well, except your editor at the end of the day. Your editor might go, this is not working.
Even so, with an editor as somebody who is going to self-publish, you can choose whether or not
to follow their advice. Yeah.
And if they know you well enough and you've got that kind of relationship with them, even that is more of a free relationship than you would have with traditional authors. So what with women having more of a voice in the romance genre and writing more for women, and self-published authors having, if you like, kind of less constraints around them about what they write and who they write for and, what they choose to do with their characters. I think it's, in my view, it's all looking terribly good for the romance authors.
It does, doesn't it? I love that, and I think that is perfect, and it is also the perfect place for us to leave this. So I am so delighted that you could join me. I can't wait to hear what people say about this interview. Thank you very much, Sarah. That was so lovely of you to join us today. Thank you so much.
I've had such a good time. Thank you so much.
Till next time.